yourself to the jury?
Sure. My name is Dr. Francis Reese Warren.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. Warren.
I would love to. I'm from Cincinnati, but I moved to Midlands when I turned 25. I currently live with my wife and 3 kids near the Midland State University campus, where I'm a professor of forensic linguistics. I also work as a defense consultant in my free time.
How did you first get into that line of work?
Well, from a young age, I've really always been interested in the different dialects in America. For example, in my hometown of Cincinnati, if we can't hear what someone says, we'll say please instead of the typical what. Sorry. So I took this interest with me to the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, where I majored in forensic linguistics.
Do you have any further education in your field?
I do. I also have a PhD from Georgetown University.
Dr. Warren, have you ever been published in your field before?
I have. I've published 37 different peer-reviewed papers, and my writing has actually directly affected Midlands.
Really? How's that?
Well, I wrote the book, How to Talk to Alleged Criminals. The book is in its 5th edition and is standard police reading at police departments all over the country. It is also $10.99 on Amazon.
Dr. Warren, how specifically are you involved in today's case here?
Well, I was first retained by the defense to look into the possibility of entrapment.
Oh, Dr. Warren, I'm a little confused. You were retained by the defense, but you were testifying to them today?
That's correct. I showed them my results, and they told me they would not need me to testify.
We'll get to your results in just a minute, Dr. Warren, but first I have to ask you how you came to them. Did you have the reliable principles and did you have the sufficient facts and data to come to your conclusions?
Of course, yes.
Could you review for the members of the jury what sort of data you looked at?
Okay. I had the March 31st conversation between Messrs. Avery Bancroft, Corey Hyde, and Officer Keenan. I also had the March 30th email conversation with Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde. And then finally, I have the affidavits of both Keenan and Hyde.
Did you use the reliable principles and methods in your field when coming to your conclusions today?
Yes, I did.
Could you briefly explain what those methods are to the jury?
I would love to. So first, I used a simple transcript review, then a topic content analysis, then I used a contrasting analysis, and finally, I used a response analysis.
Dr. Warren, after you applied those methods to the facts of today's case, were you able to come to these type of conclusions?
I did. I actually came to a 2-part conclusion. The first part was that Officer Keenan followed best practices when conversing with Avery Bancroft. And the second part was that both Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde minimized their use of conversational strategies that tend to induce criminal conduct in unwilling participants.
Dr. Warren, I'd like to break down that conclusion and take it one by one for the members of the jury. Could you explain your first conclusion a little bit more?
Sure. So in the field of forensic linguistics, there's a 4-step process for which an undercover officer should follow when conversing with a subject in an undercover operation. From my analysis, I conclude that Officer Keenan followed these 4 steps nearly perfectly.
Could you review what exactly those 4 steps are for the members of the jury?
Sure. So I've actually prepared a demonstrative for this.
Your Honor, permission for the witness to step down and make use of a demonstrative?
Yes.
Dr. Warren, before we show this to the members of the jury, does this appear to be a fair and accurate copy of the demonstrative you created for today's trial?
It does.
Does it appear to have been changed or altered in any way?
It does not.
Okay. Could you explain to the members of the jury what exactly it is we're looking at?
You will look at the 4 ideal visualization, the 4 ideal steps that an officer should follow when conversing with subject in undercover operation.
Dr. Warren, I'd like to take it right from the top. Could you explain the first step to the members of the jury?
Sure. So the first step, point A, is that the officer should ask open-ended questions. This is to this is in the hopes that the subject will trip up and provide evidence of his own guilt with relatively little prompting. And as you can see from the example, his questions were very open-ended.
Moving on now to the second step of the ideal sequence. Could you explain that to the jury?
Sure. So the second step, point B, is that the officer should drop hints of illegal conduct. This is in the hope that the defendant will latch on to these hints and provide evidence of his own guilt.
Did it appear that Officer Keenan utilized that second step in today's investigation?
It does, yes. After his first two questions, which were both open-ended, he started incorporating hints of illegal activity in his conversation, as you can see from the example.
Moving on now to the third step. Could you explain that to the jury?
Of course, the third step, point C, is that the officer prompts the target to tell a story about the events surrounding the alleged illegal conduct. This is in the hope that the defendant will, with relatively little prompting again, trip up and incorporate evidence of his criminal conduct in his story.
When investigating today's case, did you find any evidence that Officer Keenan had utilized step 3?
I did not. This step is only used after the illegal conduct has been committed, and as of March 31st, Bancroft had committed no crimes.
Moving on now to the fourth step. What is that?
The fourth step, point C, is that the officer asked the defendant a clear, unambiguous question on whether they will or will not engage in criminal conduct. This step, like the one above it, was not used.
Why not?
It seems that Avery Bancroft replied so affirmatively to step 2 that there was really no need for step 4.
Thank you, Dr. Warren. You may return to your seat.
All right.
Dr. Warren, I remember earlier you mentioned that your conclusion came in 2 parts. Could you just remind the members of the jury what the second part of your conclusion was?
Sure. The second part of my conclusion was that both Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde minimized their use of conversational strategies that tend to induce criminal conduct in unwilling participants.
How did you come to that conclusion?
Well, in the field of forensic linguistics, there are 10 key identified ways in which an undercover officer can induce criminal conduct in an unwilling subject. It seems that from my analysis of the transcript, I conclude that both Corey Hyde and Officer Keenan minimized their use of these 10 strategies. In fact, did not implement 5 of them at all.
Were there any of those strategies that were present in today's case that concerned you?
Yes, there was one, the coaching of informants.
How specifically did that apply to today's investigation?
Well, it seems that some of the statements that Corey Hyde made in the conversation on March 31st were actually direct quotes from his email exchange with Officer Keenan on March 30th.
Did that raise a particular concern for you?
Well, yes and no. While it is a concern that Keenan seemed to coach Hyde, in no way did he coach him to flagrantly induce criminal conduct.
Thank you, Dr. Warren. I have no further questions at this time, Your Honor. If opposing counsel would like, I can be instructed to demonstrate.
Go ahead, take it down.